Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 6th Annual Your Weight Matters National Convention. Yay! I'm Shelley Vicari, and I serve on the Obesity Action Coalition National Board of Directors, and I'm honored to serve as the chair of the Convention Planning Committee. On behalf of the Convention Committee, we would like to thank you for joining us in New Orleans, and we're very excited for this amazing weekend. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the generous sponsors whose support make this wonderful weekend of learning and togetherness possible. Our platinum sponsor, Novo Nordisk, silver sponsors, Azi, Novartis, Orexogen, bronze sponsors, Aspire Bariatrics, Bariatric Advantage, Celebrate Bariatric Supplements, Ethicon Endosurgery, Geisinger, KVK Tech, Medtronic, Weight Watchers, and YWeight.com. Please join me in thanking all these incredible companies for their generous support of YWM 2017. Please join me in also thanking all of our wonderful exhibitors for their support and ability to showcase their products and services at this year's meeting. Thank you. As I look out into the crowd this morning, I see a lot of new faces and many familiar ones as well. If this is your first time joining us here at Convention, welcome. And if you're a returning attendee, we're excited to see you again. We've taken great pride in crafting an amazing program for you to enjoy this weekend. You'll hear from the most sought-after speakers on topics such as weight, nutrition, exercise, health, weight bias, and much more. This year's convention theme of coming together is very important, as we at the OAC have spent the past year thinking about our membership, you, and most importantly, what it means to be a part of the OAC and our community. I would like to thank Novo Nordisk, the community patron sponsor of the OAC Community Building events, for their generous support. Thank you to them. Thanks to them, we will have many opportunities this weekend to learn more about what it means to be a part of the OAC community and how you, the new people that are joining us today, can join and be a part of us. This weekend is very special because you're going to experience all that the OAC has to offer at convention, but most importantly, you're going to experience the OAC's community of support. That community of support will be here for you, not just this weekend, but all year long. Developing what it means to be a part of the OAC community is no easy task. And throughout this past year, OAC Chairwoman Amber Huett-Garcia has taken this process and really looked at what it means to be a part of this OAC community and why support is so important to all of us. Before we welcome Amber to the stage, I would like to share with you a special video from her where she gives us a look into what support means to her.
Hi, I am Amber Huett-Garcia, and I'm the chairwoman of the Obesity Action Coalition, and my support network has been pretty consistent for the last 5 to 6 years, and I'm lucky to have such a big support network that includes my fellow colleagues on the National Board of Directors. Not only are they brilliant and loving and funny people, but they're also experts in so many fields, and I have access at the tip of my fingers and just the touch of a dial, and it means a lot to me that they always help me navigate my own journey with my weight, which has been a struggle since I've been in kindergarten. I've always been affected by obesity. Every single person in my family has been affected by obesity and still is. And then my husband who loves me no matter how I'm feeling about my body, no matter how successful or unsuccessful I feel at times, and that has been unconditionally loving husband. And when you are battling a disease that is relentless, is not something I take for granted. And then the third person is my daughter Parker, who isn't necessarily encouraging, but she reminds me of a future and why I focus so much on my health and why building both my knowledge and fighting bias is so important, because I want to build a world where she can become any young woman, no matter what her body looks like. She knows that her mama is doing all that she can to make our community one that she wants to be a part of as an adult. And so I think I just want to make her proud.
please join me in welcoming OAC Chairwoman Amber Huett-Garcia.
Good morning. Thank you, Shelley. And everyone, please join me in giving Shelley a round of applause for her amazing work on this incredible convention. You know, they showed me that video and I was like, it's all right, that's a lot of Amber, but if that's the look you're going for, we're good. Well, good morning, everyone. I am Amber Huett-Garcia, and I am the OAC's chairwoman, and it's a pleasure to be together here at YWM2017 in New Orleans. As you can tell by the video, there are many sources of support in my life, and each one of them means something special. When I look at my husband and my beautiful daughter, I know I want to help build a better world for our family. I know I want my daughter to grow up in a world free of shame and blame, a world free of judgment that values her for who she is on the inside and out. I am constantly thinking about how I can make a difference in obesity, and to be honest, I'm looking for magic. I'm a hopeless optimist. I spend a lot of time reading leadership books, articles, thinking, how do I get conscious to what it means to be transformational for our community, for all people affected by obesity? What is it going to take to change people's hearts and minds about obesity? And I've tried it all. I've tabled health fairs, I've given countless presentations, sat at tables with CEOs and executives who are eager to hear our new idea for the next program. I literally have the congressional switchboard programmed into my cell phone and think maybe they'll listen this time. But we won't change the conversation with any of those things alone. The real winning strategy all along has been stepping out of my comfort zone, over and over again. The most powerful thing I can do is model permission. Permission to dream, be unconditionally worthy of love, respect, and of the power to start where you are at, and that be great. I can't grant you permission or tell you that it's safe to shine or that your differences are worth celebrating. I can only show you that. I can guess that some of you are feeling that knot in the pit of your stomachs right now. It might be excitement, it might be our eternal alarms going, what did I sign up for? Trust me, you'll get the education, the insights, the new friendships, all of the things that you signed up for and more. The more is the space that we become the best versions of ourselves, the ourselves that we aspire to be. People have often asked me, how'd you get to be the chairwoman of the OAC? And each time I honestly say, I just kept showing up. I can imagine the world I want to live in, and there's still work to do. So I'm inviting you to create the world you want. We're going to write new stories this weekend. It's going to be full of phrases like, that's not true. Or maybe even practicing, you don't have permission to talk to me that way. You can want to address your weight for health and still be a complete person. You can want to address your weight for health and still be a complete person. This modeling of permission starts with the things we tell ourselves so we eventually become natural advocates. We are rewriting our default messages to ourselves so we can build comfort in the scarier situations that require us to be the biggest version of ourselves. The spaces where we often feel shame in our bodies and the shake in our voices. We're going to start speaking up. Don't believe the things that people tell you about who you are and what it does or does not make you worthy of. It's time to reject other people's stories because we don't have time to internalize them. I promise you, from this moment forward, all of you will feel like part of a community. The OAC community is your safe space, so practice being your bravest selves this weekend. We're here for you at all times, the highs and the lows, the good days and the bad. Through the OAC community, you will draw the strength to be your best selves and not let the negative influences and messages that we face each day enter your world. In just a few moments, you'll hear more about this topic and why we need to come together as a community and support one another, and why accepting weight bias is no longer an option. By coming together, we will create the world we all want to live in, the community we all want to be part of, a community that fights weight bias, advocates for access to care, and supports one another unconditionally. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Scott Kahan to the stage. Dr. Kahan is a physician trained in both clinical medicine and public health. He serves as the director of the National Center for Weight and Wellness, is medical director of the George Washington University Strategies to Overcome and Prevent Obesity Alliance, and is also on the board of directors for the American Board of Obesity Medicine and the Obesity Action Coalition. He is also the co-chair of the 2017 Convention Program Agenda Committee. Please welcome Dr. Scott Kahan.
And with all those titles there, you definitely better listen to what I have to say. Here we go. All right, thanks, Amber. I am so excited to be here. I'm always excited to be at the OAC conference. You all are in for a treat. I'm particularly excited, though, at this year's topic, coming together, and where we're starting with in this year's conference. You would think you come to a meeting like this, and we're going to open it up with a big talk on weight loss, or a big talk on nutrition, or physical activity, or bariatric surgery, or diet bars, or something like that. And you're going to hear about all those things throughout the weekend. They're all important for what they are. But what I'm going to talk about right now is what I think is the most important issue when it comes to obesity and living with obesity. And that is weight bias, and in particular, internalized weight bias. So weight bias stems in part from oversimplified and inaccurate beliefs about weight and obesity. Weight bias is the inclination to form unreasoned or irrational judgments about a person or a group who carries excess weight. It can lead to prejudice, it can lead to hostility, it can lead to devaluation, discrediting, shaming, and other discriminating or negative outcomes. And it reduces the bearer from a whole and usual person to one who is tainted and discounted. Weight bias essentially adds insult to the direct injury of obesity. Now, in liberal democracies, tolerance and inclusion are among the most fundamental values that we hold. And bias, stigma, prejudice, discrimination of any kind are considered inherently evil and as a threat to the health of the society, except when it comes to weight and obesity. Still largely in our society, people with obesity are considered acceptable targets of stigma. It's heartbreaking, it's wrong. We wouldn't accept it in any other area of life, whether ethnic, gender, racial bias, or the like, but yet still we implicitly or explicitly accept weight bias in our society. And we've all seen this in many, many different ways. I have a few examples for you here. Have you ever felt marginalized or devalued simply based on your weight or your shape or your size? Already I see a lot of nodding there. Here's one example. This is from Twitter. This blew up not too long ago. This guy is, believe it or not, on the school board somewhere in New York, and he wrote out of nowhere on Twitter, "Listen, we're all Americans, which means it's okay to have 10 or 20 pounds to lose. But if you are a completely fat, disgusting pig, then put the fork down and stop stuffing your ass with cake at Ruby Tuesdays. And don't sit next to me on the plane," and I can go on and on and on. In what universe does he think this is okay? And would he do it in any other context of life other than this? And yet we see things like this and hear things like this and experience things like this all the time, sometimes not so in your face as much as this guy, but it's so commonplace. Here's another example. Have you ever felt discriminated because of your weight at a job interview or on the job? And there's lots of data on this where people are stigmatized and they have a lower likelihood of getting a job if they're heavier or getting a good review at their job if they're heavier. Here's one example in my world of academic medicine. This is a psychology professor at NYU. "Dear obese PhD applicants, if you don't have the willpower to stop eating carbs, you won't have the willpower to do your dissertation. How idiotic is that? I mean, on top of the fact that it's nasty and horrible, it's obviously just plain wrong, and yet it's so common. And unfortunately, many of us in this room have experienced versions of this and continue to. How about this one? Have you ever felt that you couldn't participate in everyday things without the fear of being teased because of your weight? So this is from one of my friends here. She wrote, I live in a condominium and our complex has big lawns between the buildings and the streets. I'd invited a few friends over for a little barbecue. We set out our blankets, grilled, pulled out a Frisbee, and the usual stuff. While I was relaxing on a blanket, someone in a car passing by yelled out, "You big fat whale," and made a sound that I guess he thought was a whale noise. I'm so embarrassed, especially since all my friends heard it too. I haven't hosted a barbecue since or sat out on our beautiful lawn since then, and that happened 15 years ago. That's a very close friend of mine. And I know many of us have experienced things like that. How about this one? Have you ever felt that your doctor ignored you and instead attributed everything to your weight? And now I see a whole lot of nods. So here's one example. I began describing my symptoms. So this woman went into her doctor. She had a lot of hip pain and so forth. She wrote me an email afterwards. I began describing my symptoms when the doc interrupted. Lose weight. I told him I lost 70 pounds in the last year. He said, lose more. I'm not sure why you're in pain, but I'm sure it's from your weight. He didn't ask about my symptoms or examine my hip. The only thing he touched was my hand when he shook it before walking out. It's ironic. I asked for his help because the pain interferes with my ability to exercise. I don't doubt that my weight is involved, but to so quickly attribute everything to that one factor, especially when it began after I dropped all this weight, seems too pat an answer. By the way, he noticed I was about to cry and commented, "See, you're even crying from the pain," and again referenced my weight. I told him it wasn't the pain, it's the disappointment that I can't keep exercising as much as I'd like. But that was a lie. I was really crying because of the way he treated me. All he saw was my weight. And this is a story that I hear more probably than any other with respect to weight bias in the healthcare system. Have you ever been overlooked, dismissed, discounted, unreasonably judged, teased, shamed, humiliated simply because of your weight by family members? I know it's a lot of you because the objective data says it's about 3 out of every 4. Or by doctors, like we saw in the last example, or by classmates, or sales clerks, or coworkers and employees, or spouses, or restaurant servers, or nurses, or dietitians, or siblings, or other. It is unbelievably incredible to me just how common weight stigma is in our society. People think it's okay to judge you based on how you look, based on what your weight is, or your size, or your shape. And it's not okay. Weight bias is more than a social issue. It's a downright objective health issue. When people experience weight bias, blood pressure goes up, they have an increase in stress hormones, they have an increased likelihood of depression and anxiety, they have diminished self-esteem and body image, they have a much higher likelihood of decreased quality of life. And one of my patients said it best when she experienced weight bias, she felt rotten to the core every single time. This is the x-ray of my friend who went to the doctor with the hip injury. So she has severe scoliosis. And in many ways, the severity of this scoliosis was caused by the weight bias. Because if she wasn't the size that she was at the time, then it's most likely that many doctors before would have caught this earlier and it wouldn't have progressed and progressed and progressed to such an extent that it is now. So I blame weight bias for much of this health issue, certainly the severity of it, the progression of it. It's particularly heartbreaking when it happens in kids. So this is an old study that's been shown in many different ways. there's about a 5-time increased likelihood for a child to experience poor quality of life when they have obesity compared to those that are normal weight, because of the pervasive stigmatization in society and in schools around kids. Now, that may or may not be terribly striking to you, but what if you compare to kids with cancer? There's more than twice as much likelihood for kids with obesity to have poor quality of life than kids with cancer. Imagine that. And importantly, weight bias isn't motivating. This is one of the biggest misconceptions that I know of in weight and in the world of obesity. People often assume that if you're stern with people and if you just shame them a little bit, it'll motivate them to change their behavior and lose weight. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. When people are exposed to weight stigma, they tend to eat more, they tend to binge more, they tend to eat more comfort foods, they tend to have lower motivation for exercise. I know I would. When doctors counsel patients for weight loss and healthy behavior change, if the patient doesn't feel judged by the doctor, they have a 50% higher likelihood of losing a lot of weight compared to people who were counseled but feel judged and berated and discriminated by the doctor. So the bias, the stigmatization, isn't motivating here either. And in a study that followed people over 4 years, when you look at people who didn't have obesity, but were a little overweight, you followed them up over 4 years, those who experienced weight stigma during those 4 years had almost a 300% increased risk of developing obesity compared to people of the same weight who didn't experience weight stigma. And when you look at people who started in the obesity range, they had more than a 300% chance of maintaining that obesity and not losing weight compared to people who didn't experience weight stigma. So weight bias isn't motivating. It just makes us feel like crap, and it gets in the way, and it's inappropriate. Now, what's interesting is that not everyone is harmed by weight bias, and we see this across a range of different areas of prejudice and stigmatization, whether ethnic or racial or gender. Some people get right past it. It's a speed bump, nothing else, whereas other people are paralyzed by the stigma and the prejudice. And we're learning a lot about what the difference between those two groups of people. One of them is whether people internalize the weight bias. So this seems to mediate the relationship between weight bias and harm from weight bias and poor outcomes from weight bias. So weight bias internalization is the extent to which a person realizes that he or she has an identity that is devalued and stigmatized in society and comes to agree with and believe that these negative societal beliefs apply to him or herself. And so now we're building a lot more data around internalized weight bias, and what it's starting to show is that internalized weight bias is probably more damaging than just experiencing weight bias itself. So if you look at people who have experienced weight bias but have low internalization of that weight bias, they have a relatively low risk of developing prediabetes or high cholesterol. Whereas people who experience similar weight bias but have high internalization of that weight bias, they have a 3 times higher likelihood of getting prediabetes, a 6 times higher likelihood of getting high cholesterol, and then when it comes to reduced quality of life, very similar, about a 6 times increased risk of having poor quality of life when they internalize the weight bias, when they believe in the nonsense that's out there that we experience. This is the harm of accepting weight bias. And this is why we're talking about this topic to start off this entire weekend around weight and obesity and self-care and health. So let's talk about some things we can do to give ourselves power to overcome and not accept weight bias and to be healthy. So I'll talk about a few recommendations. It's important to appreciate the complexity of obesity, to challenge negative thoughts, to build productive coping skills, to advocate against weight bias, and for us all to come together and work together on this. So first, obesity is incredibly complex, and that's one of the most important things that I hope you'll all learn this weekend if you haven't already. So look at the middle here. Here's the sort of calories in, calories out scale, and that's important. Our behaviors are important. What we eat, how much we move. Of course, that's relevant in terms of weight regulation and obesity risk. But it's couched within so many things that play into what we eat and how much we eat and how much we move, and so on and so forth. There's our environment, and our environment hugely predisposes to what we do. So when it comes to the food environment, for example, in general, the highest calorie and most unhealthy foods tend to be the cheapest foods, and also the largest portion foods, and also the most heavily marketed foods, and also engineered to be the tastiest foods, kinda. And then they have all kinds of characters and superheroes that are out there, on the labels and in the commercials selling those foods. So they're sort of the most fun foods. So you put all those things together, and of course we're predisposed to turn towards those foods more often. It's interesting. There's been a couple studies on this. If you give kids a snack and you have a blank wrapper around it, compared to giving them the same snack, but a wrapper that has one of their favorite superheroes or favorite cartoon heroes on it, there's a huge difference in how much they eat, in whether they say they like it or not, and how they rate the tastiness of the food, and whether they finish the food or not. And again, it's the exact same food, but the packaging makes so much of a difference. So the environmental cues around our food decisions and physical activity decisions make a strong impact on what we do, and almost all of those defaults are set up for us to eat more and move less. It's a bit of a cruel joke, unfortunately, and something that we need to keep advocating on to make our food environment and physical activity environments healthier, to give us half a chance. Then there's our biology. So even when you lose weight, our biology fights against that. It makes us hungrier. It makes us think about food more. It lowers our metabolism. Another part of this sort of cruel joke, but part of the complexity of obesity. And we don't have to stand and take it. There's lots of things that you're going to learn in this weekend that helps to counter some of that biology. But nonetheless, you take the environment and you take the biology together, and you have a powerful set of drivers that explains a lot of why obesity is so prevalent. Then you throw genetics in there. Did you know that there's a greater likelihood of inheriting high weight than there is your parents' height or your grandparents' height? That's how heritable weight is. And that's way before we make our decisions on what to eat or how much to exercise or the like. And then certainly life experiences are an important part of this. So obesity is incredibly complex, and appreciating that helps to cut through so much of the noise that otherwise tells us that we're lazy or we don't have willpower or the like, and start to see it in a more objective and informed way that can help us move forward. Understanding that complexity also helps us to challenge negative thoughts. So modern psychology tells us that the meaning that we give to the events that happen around us is much more important than the objective event itself, in terms of how we feel about it, in terms of what we do as a result, and in terms of our health outcomes. So here's a simple example as an analogy. Let's say you wake up one morning and there was no call for snow, but you open your window and there's a big layer of snow on the ground. Well, there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can react to that and the thoughts that pop up in your mind as a result of that. On the one hand, you could think of this. You're like, oh gosh, I have to spend all day shoveling now. My back already hurts me. And then I have so much work to do in the office. I don't have access to that. It's just going to pile up more and more. This is horrible. How do you think you're going to feel as a result of that? You're going to feel like crap. You're probably not going to want to go out and shovel. You may not want to go out and shovel because you already feel so bad about it. And just think about all the downstream things that happen in your head, but ultimately also in terms of what you do or what you don't do. On the other hand, you could look at the exact same objective event, snow on the ground, and think about, wow, this is awesome. I get to skip work. I get to go outside and have snowball fights. I get to have hot chocolate and hang out and watch TV. And I really needed this day off of work. And think about how much different you feel, even though it's the exact same objective event. And think about how different that day is going to go. So challenging negative thoughts is extremely important. The negative thought, one of the negative thoughts that's common in the context of what we're talking about here, is that obesity is all about willpower, and because I have obesity, I'm lazy and I don't have willpower, and I'm a loser, and fill in the blanks. That is like an analogy of this thought to that objective event. Instead, understanding the complexity of obesity helps us to realize that it's not about laziness and it's not all about willpower. It's much more complex and informed than that. I can't tell you how many patients I have that are doctors and lawyers and senators and even a couple of almost presidents. And virtually across the board, even in those latter ones, they come in and what they say is, I have no willpower. Why don't I have willpower? That's how they interpret it. That's their negative thoughts. And before we start going on a diet or talking about exercise plans and all that, we start to challenge those negative thoughts. At best, you could say, especially in those people, but probably in virtually all of us, the problem may be that nobody could possibly have enough willpower to muster up all that we need to deal with in terms of the work that we have and the obesogenic environment that we live in, and so on and so on and so on, the genetics we're working against. But it's not that we don't have any willpower. It's certainly not that we're lazy, particularly the people here. Think about it. You all came here, some from across the country, took time out of your life, out of your family, out of your work, spent the money to come here, spent the time and the energy to listen to people like me and everyone. That doesn't say that you're lazy. That says the exact opposite. So it's important to challenge these negative thoughts. And I think it's also important to challenge false dichotomies that are so common in the world of obesity and the world of weight bias. So one of my patients just put this into perfect words in an email. She said, Dr. Kahan, I'm struggling with being frustrated and angry with the way some people stigmatize and talk about obesity while also wanting to make changes for myself. It feels contradictory, like I either have to buy into the narrative that size matters most and thin is more valuable, or give up on my efforts to lose weight and make long-term changes. Amber was referring to this before. It's a false dichotomy. You don't have to give in to that. We can fight against the stigmatization that is so common in our world around weight, and we can also work on our self-care and our health. Those two things don't butt heads. They can be intertwined with each other, but we have to work through the thinking behind that. Now, living in our society with so much weight stigma is kind of like walking through a minefield. You need a real set of skills and strategies to be able to deal with that until we can lower the bias in our society significantly. So it's important to build a set of coping skills, productive coping skills for dealing with weight bias. Now there are some really positive ones like self-acceptance and seeking social support and positive self-talk. And again, that doesn't mean that you can't work on your self-care and your weight and your health while also seeking self-acceptance. And then there are others that are generally believed to be more counterproductive. Self-blame, avoidance, isolation, attempting to lose weight just to counter the bias. That's not a good reason to lose weight. That's not going to keep you going very long. Lose weight because you want to feel good. Lose weight because you want to be healthy. Lose weight because it's consistent with your internal values of living a great life where you're not limited by your weight or your size or the like, but not because somebody's telling you that you're not right or you don't look the way that they think you should look. So we need to build these coping skills, and I don't mean to say that this is easy. This is a process. There are a lot of good self-help books out there. Just Google coping skills in Amazon or the like, and you'll come up with a number of good self-help books. There are lots of good psychologists out there that can help building these coping skills. But I have two really basic examples that I think if you walked away with and did nothing else than this, I think it will help all of us. So the first one is, when you experience weight stigma and when you feel crappy about it, step back and think to yourself in your head and remind yourself that I'm safe and sound in my own skin. And no matter what anybody else says or thinks, they're over there and I'm over here, and I don't need to listen to what they're saying, and turn around and walk away. Sort of the easier way of doing that, that was kind of wordy, is to step back, turn away, and in your head, just say F you to that person. Don't take it. So please remember that. And we need to advocate against weight bias. So this is from more than a half century ago, from Eleanor Roosevelt, talking to the UN. She said, "Where after all do universal human rights begin? In small places close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he lives in, the school or college he attends, the factory, the farm, the office where he works. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal rights, seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity, without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerted citizen action to uphold them close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world." Now, she was talking about racial and ethnic and gender bias and prejudice, but that absolutely, and maybe even more these days, applies to weight bias. So remember these words and stand up for yourself, but also stand up for the whole community by advocating for our society to move past so much of this abhorrent weight stigma and prejudice. And we can do this together. That's what's so special about the OAC. It is the only, to my knowledge, organization out there that is devoted to patients and people, and one of its core messages and goals is to eradicate weight stigma. So you have a willing partner here, not just this weekend, but throughout every day of your year, to work with at rooting out weight stigma and getting through our lives, but also helping the rest of the world that's not here to deal with weight stigma and get past it as a society. So one thing I'll just leave you with is recently we started at OAC a weight bias reporting form. So it's an outlet where you can go and fill in the form here. You can tell us about your experience. Quite frankly, talking about it's going to help just a little bit. It makes you feel just a little bit better. More importantly, though, we're starting to build a database of this, and it gives us opportunities then for us to use the weight of our organization to push back on these instances of weight bias. So I hope you'll go there and pitch in with this reporting form, and I hope to talk to the rest of you, hopefully throughout this weekend, about these topics and others. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kahan. That was an incredibly insightful look at weight bias and the harm of accepting it. I think some of us picked up a few new phrases, some of them brushing off some old ones, but I'm excited to be here this weekend. Each of us has made the decision to attend this year's convention for a variety of reasons, and it is probably safe to say that those reasons are shared across the audience. Some of you are here because you want to get back on track with your weight loss. Some of you are here because you want to learn more about how to manage your weight and health. And some of you are here because you're ready to take the next step and be part of the OAC. There is one certainty that is true for all of us. We all have a place at this convention, and even more so in the OAC community. The OAC community is a vibrant one with many strong but unified voices. We are here to support one another in our journeys. Throughout this weekend, you'll learn more about this community and why we need you, why we need us, and how we can come together to create the world that we want to live in with each other. So I'd like to take a moment to share with you a special video that showcases our OAC members and the pieces to their journey, their support, and what has led them to be part of the OAC and our community.
Hi everybody, it's Deb Gow from St. Francis, Minnesota. When I first saw the OAC posting asking people to share their journey of support and how that looks for them, I was a little unsure how to answer that. I've always been supported by my family and friends, and for me that goes without saying. But when I chose to have weight loss surgery in 2001 and began this journey to a healthier self, I felt really alone. My surgeon gave me as much information as he could, but they didn't have as many of the things that we just take for granted today available back then. And so I had to learn all of these things on my own, and that made me feel really not supported, I guess. But all of that changed when I attended the YWM convention.
We are the revelry, we are the dreamers. We dance through the night, in our bones we can feel it. Aiming for the stars against the sky. When we are together, we are bright. We'll light up. We've been waiting for this moment to come. We were made for this adventure. We feel it in our blood. We'll light up. We've been waiting for this moment to come.
The moment that I arrived, I felt accepted, I felt included, and I received and got the support that I didn't know I was looking for, but it was there for me. It was there in the OAC and the YWM community. All of us, the OAC stands for Obesity Action Coalition, but for me it stands for one awesome community. It is this community that I am ever thankful for giving me the support in my journey towards a healthier self.
We are one awesome community. I love that. Are you all ready for YWM 2017? No. It doesn't sound like you're ready. Are you ready? Okay. Welcome to YWM 2017, and welcome to the OAC community. Get ready for an incredible weekend. We are so excited that you're here with us.